Welcome to Prepared for Parenthood, the podcast for hopeful, expectant, and new parents with little ones up to age 5. I'm your host, Dr. Stephanie Duger, a psychotherapist, author, educator, parent coach, and married mother of 2. On this show, we'll discuss everything from the most up-to-date practicals of best supporting your young children, to thriving in relationship as a family, to more surprising topics around the psychology and development of babies from conception through age 5. So sit back, relax, and enjoy. I'm thrilled to have you here today. Welcome back to Prepared for Parenthood. We have a very special guest on today, my husband of more than 18 years, Dan Riggan. Dan has been a licensed professional counselor in Colorado for 15 years, who specializes in working with couples and individuals. He worked for many years in the field as an international wilderness guide and an adaptive ski school instructor and manager before becoming a therapist. We met in the first on-site master's in transpersonal counseling psychology with a wilderness therapy focus in 2002. And after graduating from Naropa University in 2005, Dan worked all over Boulder County in a variety of positions. Everything that he teaches his clients, he lives as a practice in our relationship. Dan is a masterful interpersonal communicator, and I've specifically invited him on today to share some of his expertise on this topic. So welcome, Dan. I'm really happy to have you here today.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Can you describe what healthy interpersonal communication looks like in a relationship?
Yeah, it's a pretty broad term, but I would say generally speaking, it's really important to have communication lines open, and there are a lot of factors that get involved that kind of clog those lines. So most importantly, it's critical to create enough space and time in a relationship to be able to communicate the essential factors of what occurs in life, from the practicals of daily life. If you're in parenting and whatnot, there's a lot of kind of business of a relationship. And then there's all the juicy stuff, the fun stuff, the emotional connection, what's happening in one's life. And again, there are a lot of factors that kind of clog those communication arteries, so to speak. So it's really about having some kind of practice or commitment to make sure that the couplehood is communicating what's essential to feel like they're connected and nourished in the relationship.
And what do you think some of the most important factors of maintaining an intimate connection are with your partner?
Great and big question. I don't want to make assumptions about what other people think, but I'm of the belief that people mostly just want to feel connected to their partner in a relationship. And I've checked it out, and all of my couples have said, yes, that's true. I want to feel connected and happy in my relationship. The two most critical factors from my experience to have a chance of maintaining that relationship, that connection, the nourishment, is communication, healthy communication, consistent communication, and then intimacy and sex. And there are many aspects, again, that kind of get in the way of that connection. And life happens too. I can speak just a little bit to when we had our first baby. It was earth rocking. It was this massive kind of reorg in our family system. And it took, I would say, us a while. I'm not going to speak for you, but from my experience, Stephanie, there were many times where I felt really disconnected to you. And I think through the years, we might have these chasms of disconnection in our relationship. And then through the years of our practice of our relationship, we've learned how to have the disconnections just be really small, and then we come back together. And that's where I really want to support my couples to be. There's no way that, people are going to be connected all the time. That's just not life, and it's not realistic. But we do want to try to prevent people from feeling very disconnected, and that there are massive ruptures in the relationship that take a long time to come back together and repair, because that's a more painful way to live than is essential. And I think, again, people would prefer to mostly feel more connected to their partner on a regular basis.
And since we're talking specifically about expectant and new parents, why do you think that communication tends to get strained with new parents?
Yeah, when a baby's on board, for those who've been through it, that baby takes up so much of the oxygen naturally. It takes a lot to figure out how to be a new parent. There's sleep deprivation. So it really takes a while for the dust to settle in the relationship. And where couples often get off track after having a baby, before the baby, they're pointing to each other. They've got lots of time and they can connect and they can do all the things. And when baby comes on board, boom, they're looking at the baby, trying to make sure they're taking care of the baby, which is essential. But then a lot of times I see they don't find their way back to each other. And that is a slippery slope. So I just actually had a couple yesterday who they're probably 5 months pregnant. And I really just tried to emphasize that's going to happen. They're going to do that thing. And then I want to really support them in coming back together as soon as possible, even in the early days, to talk about, wow, how is parenthood going for you? How can I support you? What's happening for you? So again, natural when a new baby on board, that there's just less resource and time to do all of the things that nourish a relationship. And not just in the beginning of becoming a parent, but as the child develops, the from my experience, the most important relationship actually is the connection between the two adults, between the two parents. Assuming that you're going to be a good and reasonable parent, which a lot of people are, when the two adults focus on each other, that's the foundation of everything. That's the foundation of the family. It's the foundation of everything that you're creating. And the kids can actually feel that. I'll give this example that was very illuminating to me when our kids were younger, and I would watch them, their energies would be out of control and be like, oh, what's wrong with my kid? And I realized that some of the time anyway, they were responding to discord either in our relationship or me just being not really well regulated. So after I learned that lesson, anytime after I would see one or both of our kids acting out or being dysregulated on some level, I would always check in with myself first. Am I regulated? Am I doing okay? Are me and you, Stephanie, doing okay? And if the answer was, yeah, we're solid, then I'd go back to the drawing board and be like, huh, I wonder what's happening for my kid. Just again, to emphasize how important it is to maintain that relationship through communication, intimacy, all the things that are critical to a healthy, nourishing connection.
And for you, as a new dad of our first baby, what do you think one of the hardest things for you personally was?
It's a good question. It's been a minute. So our oldest is 17 now, so it's been that long. There are multiple parts. I remember when our daughter was born, I caught her and I felt like I was supposed to love her, but I didn't have this feeling of love. I had this feeling of, I cried, I emoted, but then pretty soon after that, I was like, I don't even know who you are. So I had this feeling of guilt of, is there something wrong with me? And I got over time that it really just takes time to find that bond. And the birthing parent is naturally going to be more connected because they were in the belly. And then if you're breastfeeding, there's going to be that natural connection too. So part of what happened for me was role disorientation. I was confused about, how do I fit in here? How can I help? Yes, I can change diapers, but it was hard for a long time just to figure out how to be a dad. And I'm still learning how to be a dad 17 years in.
And for our audience, we've talked a lot on this program about prenatal bonding. And I didn't know about prenatal bonding when we were pregnant with our first baby, or even with my second baby. And so while we would talk and sing and read to our babies in utero, it wasn't quite to the extent that one might do that in prenatal bonding. And so I imagine had we had a little more support around how to do that and how to really try to connect with a baby before the baby's even born, we might have been in a better position for that. So I just wanted to put that piece in there as well. So when we're thinking about things like best practices for maintaining connection in a couple, but specifically a couple who has just had a baby or is maybe even a year or two in, what might some of those pieces look like?
I would say when I work with couples, there are aspects that I teach that I've learned just over the years of doing this, almost 20 years. There are just prescriptive level practices that could, and I would say would be beneficial to be implemented on a regular basis. And there are other aspects that are very couple, family specific, personality specific, that people can put their own stamp on it. But in terms of the prescriptive considerations, some of the things that I would say are time spent. If you're not spending time together, quality time together, then you're not going to be able to go to the depths in the communication that we talked about earlier that you otherwise would be able to. And I harken back to when we had our first baby, and I think we were about 6 months in, and then I felt like all of a sudden we were really desperate. We're like, we need a babysitter. We got to go on dates. And so I don't feel like we were really prepared for that too, knowing how much time we would need with each other to stay connected. And I remember that once we got the babysitter, at some point we were doing weekly dates, and it was essential just to maintain, just to keep our relationship together. And a lot of those dates were not particularly fun because we had so much to talk about and to process and to work through. So it wasn't like these fun romantic dates most of the time for a while. So that's one of them, is, making sure there's enough time together to be able to talk about all the things that you need to talk about. And then intimacy and touch is, again, another really important factor in relationships. And after having the baby, that can be tricky to find each other again because of sleep deprivation. Typically, the mom has been touched all day and doesn't want to be touched by their partner, just trying to figure out how to negotiate that piece, and sex drives can change and whatnot. It would be normal, to find each other again in that realm. And it's also really important to do so. When couples come to me, I'm always assessing how is the health of the relationship and how much damage has been done and how many patterns have been implemented that are not working for them. And that oftentimes it's based on time. So I had a couple come to me the other day, and they've been together 26 years, and patterns have been so ingrained that we're not healthy for so long. If people come to me and they've been together a few years, there's a better chance, depending on kind of what's happening in their dynamic, that we'd be able to shift the patterns and implement lots of tools to be able to have them practice and learn how to essentially maintain connection over time.
Let's move on to conflict, because we know that both from our own experience and from the experience of the couples that we see who have little ones, often ones that are even too young to be in preschool or school, there tends to be conflict that comes up, sometimes right at the beginning, sometimes not until 6 months to a year, but somewhere along the line, people tend to have conflict. And I'm just wondering if you can speak to your experience of working with people around conflict. What are the things that you look for, and how do you help them in that arena?
I want to normalize conflict. Conflict is part of being in a relationship. And I would say majority of people are conflict avoidant. And that's natural too, because most people don't get trained how to work through conflict in a healthy manner. And if people learn the tools to be able to do that, from my experience, it can actually be an intimacy builder, a connector. But oftentimes it can feel really scary because a lot of people don't have successful outcomes. And in fact, they can potentially lose relationships and potentially lose the most important attachment figure or relationship that they have. So the risk reward in their minds often feels like, I'm not going to talk about that because it's just not going to go well, because it's never gone. So all of the data points that they've seen say, no, that wouldn't be smart. And that makes sense. So it's just a matter of providing that awareness and enough support and tools to be able to navigate the difficult conversations that are essential to have in relationships. So what often happens too is that by avoiding conflict, people are avoiding oftentimes sharing whatever their truth is, or their natural self, their authentic self. And if we keep avoiding over time, then we're essentially losing the potential of our parts being in relationship to the other person and even ourselves. And that is a recipe for divorce over time. It is really essential that we be our full true selves, express our full true needs in relationship, and then try to navigate it And that's what I can work with. If we're being honest and we know what's at play for everyone, we can work with that pot and figure out, okay, how do we navigate through this? If people are withholding and avoiding, then we don't even know what the truth is. So it's just exceptionally critical for people to be able to, name their truth and especially their needs. That's what often gets missed in relationship, because ultimately in relationship, we have that initial attraction. Oh, I want to be with you. Let's make babies and start a family. Then all of a sudden it's not quite as rosy as it once was. And then we start having complaints, and those complaints are based on our needs not getting met. So that's what needs to get harvested out and really clarified with one another. So even in our relationship, and I share this with other couples, it's really important to be an expert on our needs and our wounds, our family of origin wounds. And then it's really important for us to be experts on our partner's needs and wounds. And having that orientation to partner's needs is going to provide a much better chance of both people being happy in the relationship. Humans tend to be self-centered. It's, I have needs. Why aren't you paying attention to me? Why are you not appreciating me? If you hold that stance, then that is a recipe for greater suffering in a relationship. Yes, we have to take care of ourselves, put the oxygen mask on, do the things that make us feel nourished. But mostly, and I do this with you, I orient toward you and your needs to make sure that you are feeling nourished. Because if you're nourished, then we're all nourished. And I would hope you do the same for me. I believe you do. So that's a critical kind of orientation in a relationship to have better chance of connection and happiness.
Which is a great segue, because you spoke earlier about how often couples run into some issues after having a baby because they're oriented more towards baby. And obviously, a newborn infant and even an infant of any age has very high needs. And those needs, obviously, they're needs, they need to be met. And so what we tend to do is focus more on baby. And the hope is that once baby's needs are met, we then reorient towards our partner. And often I think probably a lot of conflict comes up when we're not doing that because we've continued to stay focused on baby, either because we just don't have enough resource, we're tired, we're maybe nursing baby and are feeling wiped out, we're feeling maybe touched out, maybe we're so enamored with baby we forget about our partner for a while. There are lots of different reasons that could happen, but I wonder if you could speak to some of the pieces that you see coming up around conflict with new parents specifically, and with parents moving even from one child to two children, the second child or a third child or a fourth child joins the family. What are the pieces that come up that people have brought to you around conflict in those circumstances?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the first kid is different than the second kid is different than the third kid. So the first kid is, again, just such a huge shakeup. It's such a reconfiguration of the family system. There's so much to figure out about how to be a parent. It usually takes a few weeks to get your feet settled, to feel like, oh, we know we can do this. We can keep this baby alive ultimately and go from there. And I think it is what you said. It's mostly just a lack of resource and trying to figure out, based on the level of time and energy we have in any given day, how do we use that resource effectively? And that's even a learning journey. I remember thinking when we first had our kid and after we into it for a bit, we're like, oh, we only have time for one thing in our lives that really nourish us. Like basketball was mine, and all the other things were gone just because there wasn't time and resource to do that. And then with the second child, by that time, you already know how to be a parent. You got that gig dialed, but then there's just less resource, right? Even less resource, because now there's two kids to take care of. I had a couple yesterday and they just had their second child and they were really having a hard time around communication. Ultimately, they're still learning how to do practices like reflective listening, helping to make sure that they both feel really heard One thing I see and I try to normalize is with a kid or two kids or three kids, there's just not enough to go around. It almost feels like an impossible task because there's just too much to do and too little time and too little energy to do it. And in that space, I think both partners feel like they're extending everything that they can. Like, I'm doing all this stuff and you are. It's like you both have to do 140%. And in that space, what I see is that it seems like there's this chronic lack of recognition or appreciation because the person again goes to self of, what am I doing? I'm doing so much. What are you doing? You're not doing enough. And that's usually not the case. It's usually both people are working really hard. So one of the easy hacks to support that process is to recognize your partner, to give it regular appreciations about what they're doing to support the family system in this time of a lot of output. Some of the things that I teach are simple, some are more complicated. That one is such a simple one, giving appreciations. I've got some guys that are like, I don't even need appreciations. I just don't want to be yelled at. I'm like, yeah, I hear that. And appreciations are great. Like, they can't hurt to be recognized and seen. Because ultimately, I think we all want to be seen, appreciated, and loved. That's such an easy one to do. And as a practice, we do it in our family every day. We recognize each other every day. And we do that because we know that it works and it helps. And if we don't do all these little things that add up to feel better, that's a slippery slope. So again, sometimes the practices are very simple, but also really important.
We've been speaking today with my husband, Dan Riggan. It's always so fun to talk with you. And I'm wondering if you can let people know how they can get in touch with you if they're interested in more information.
If you'd like to get in touch with me, you can email me at dan@danriggan.com, DAN@DANRIGGAN.com. I practice currently in Boulder, Colorado.
Thanks so much for being here today, Dan.
Thanks for having me, Stephanie. It was really fun.
Thank you so much for listening to the Prepared for Parenthood podcast today. I hope you found this episode educational, informational, and conversational, and that you'll join me again for another episode soon. If you enjoyed listening to today's podcast, I'd very much appreciate if you would rate, review, and subscribe. If you're interested in more information related to today's podcast, or are looking for parent coaching or courses, you can find my information in the show notes or online at preparedforparenthood.com.